Welcome to the Capital News. I am your host, Alex Karitis. Today is August 8th, 2019. Thank you so much for joining me. We're going to discuss primarily a recent interview of Bernie Sanders on the Joe Rogan podcast. I highly suggest you take the time to give that a listen. You can find that on YouTube. I'm sure you can find that on any podcast app that you might have on your phone. It's only about an hour interview. Again, I highly recommend it. If you're a fan of Bernie Sanders, of course, you're probably more inclined to do so. But I would have to say, especially if you are not a fan of Bernie Sanders, that you most definitely take the time to give it a listen. Those of you who may be new to this podcast, I am no fan of Bernie Sanders. I'm not a big fan of any of the Democratic Party's candidates in this 2020 presidential election campaign. But that does not mean that I'm not going to give them the time of day to express their views and their opinions. That's the American way. And what I like about Joe Rogan, he has one of the most popular podcasts out there, if not the most popular, is the fact that he asks very interesting questions and then he shuts up. He lets his guests do the talking, which is something that we see far too rarely on Fox News, CNN, MSNBC. It's 5 to 10 minute segments of a Republican versus a Democrat spewing talking points that were written by an idiot being explained by two idiots talking over each other. And that's the bulk of our news. That's what we watch. It's infotainment. There's no entertaining aspect of it at all as far as I'm concerned anymore. It's a joke. We have serious structural issues in this country, and everything gets condensed down to a soundbite, and it gets condensed down to a 5-10 minute debate. Again, amongst one Democrat, one Republican, simply spewing talking points. That's it. Where's the third or the fourth opinion? The fifth, the sixth? It's just two. That's the problem. It's a huge problem that we have in this country, and we need to get away from it. And fortunately, thank goodness we have podcasts and people like Joe Rogan out there who give these in-depth interviews. Recall we did a podcast a couple months ago because Tulsi Gabbard, Congresswoman from Hawaii, also a Democratic candidate for the presidency, she gave an interview on the Joe Rogan podcast. And again, I highly recommend you take the time to listen to Miss Gabbard. Very interesting. Again, Joe Rogan asks interesting questions, and then he sits back and allows his guest to answer. And you get to hear what these candidates actually have to say. You know, Bernie Sanders, you can call him crazy. Of course, he has crazy antics. He, throws his arms around, gets heated, gets excited, voice moves around, this type of stuff. Most definitely, you can call him crazy Bernie. We call him crazy Bernie here. But it's for sound bites, and he makes that point on the Joe Rogan podcast. But first, let's get to some of the market news, and then we'll get back to the politics. So the S&P gained 54 points. The markets were continuing their rally today. That's an increase of 1.9%. The Dow gained 371, an increase of 1.4%. The NASDAQ gained 176 points, an increase of 2.25%. So a huge rally with the NASDAQ. The Russell 2000, the small cap index, gained 31.5 points, an increase of 2.1%. So a huge gain on the heavy tech sector and the small caps. The Dow Jones Transports gained 1.7%. The New York Stock Exchange was up 1.5%. Oil, it oscillated back and forth today, but given where we were yesterday on last night's podcast, oil is virtually flat from yesterday's podcast. WTI is at $52.50 a barrel, and Brent is at $57.25 per barrel. Again, folks, unless there is some major geopolitical event that unfolds, and of course, one could come out of the woodwork at any hour, Venezuela, Iran, escalations between Pakistan and India, it could be anything, anywhere, at any moment. It could even be something as more violent protests in Hong Kong. If that really gets out of control, that could be something that throws the market into a tailspin. Although I don't necessarily know how much of an issue that would do with oil, but it all depended on the details of it. But most definitely, if it affected Venezuela or Iran, that would be a bigger problem. Otherwise, We're in the midst of a slowing global economy. The supply-demand function is just pointing south as far as I'm concerned. Lower levels for sure when it comes to oil, natural gas prices. Gold was able to get back above the $1,500 an ounce mark. It is now trading at $1,504 an ounce. Silver, $17.12 an ounce. Again, I believe both of these precious metals are still undervalued, and I think they will be for quite a while unless they skyrocket here over the next couple of days or weeks. We have central banks the world over continuing to cut interest rates, going into zero interest rate policy, or we will be back there soon. We have negative interest rate policy around the world and other central banks getting ready to adopt it. We talked about the Reserve Bank of New Zealand. They just cut by 50 basis points, more than what the market was anticipating. And you have their chairman come out and say, hey, negative interest rates, we'll be fine with that here down in New Zealand. And don't be surprised if the same thing happens with Australia, because we just had a statement come out from the Reserve Bank of Australia, and it says the following: it is reasonable to expect that an extended period of low rates in Australia will be needed to achieve the central bank's employment and inflation objectives. Well, who's surprised by this? Well, we're not. We're not. This is what these people do. This is what these central banks do. New Zealand, Australia, India, Serbia just cut surprisingly. Thailand, I mean, it's all over the place, folks. So buckle up. That's great news for the precious metals sector. Again, you can own them outright. You can own the ETFs, such as GLD or SLV for gold and silver respectively. You can own minor stocks and ETFs. If I was you, I'd add some to my portfolio, but do your own research, as I like to say. Uncle Sam's U.S. 10-year Treasury gained 2% today and is now yielding 1.72%. The VIX, the volatility index, lost 13% and is now trading at $16.91. This is pretty much the same story around the globe. European equities also rallied 1% to 2% depending on the index. We have Japan trading up now about 0.5%. We have the Chinese markets actually down about 1/3%. So we're going to have to see. It's intraday. Anything could happen. As we've seen just yesterday, I mean, you had stocks plummeting and then they staged a rally. I mean, you know, it's something to see. It really, truly is. I think the plunge protection team had something to do with that one, to be quite honest with you. But that just might be my conspiratorial hat getting the best of me on that one. Because there's another thing out today. Thunder Thumbs took to Twitter in a pretty lengthy tweet. It was 3 or 4 tweets going after the strong dollar and the Federal Reserve. I mean, he even said you would think that your president would be thrilled with a strong U.S. dollar. I'm not! Exclamation point. He wants a weaker dollar, folks. Does he not know what he's talking about? He has to fire Peter Navarro. He has to get rid of Peter Navarro. He has to. And somebody else in that administration has to grow a pair and tell this president the truth. Because he is looking out here, okay? He's not looking out for middle-class Americans, that it's going to make all of the goods and services that we buy more expensive because we're going to have a weaker dollar. This would benefit multinational corporations. This would benefit military-industrial complex corporations, which, by the way, are the very companies that he mentioned in his tweet. Okay? I'm not making this up. It's in the record. It's in the Twitter sphere. Okay? Go look it up. It's there. Can't make this stuff up. Then he's calling out the Federal Reserve. Aren't you paying attention to what everybody else is doing? Lower rates, now, faster. And he wants quantitative easing too, make no mistake about it. Does he know what he's saying? Because once oil prices start to increase off of the back of a weaker dollar, is he going to be complaining to OPEC again? It's a never-ending cycle here. It's as if everything is being shot from the hip. That there's no true strategy. It's simply day-to-day, which way is the wind blowing? Because just the other day, we accused China of being a currency manipulator, and here you have Thunder Thumbs telling the Federal Reserve to lower the dollar, which it isn't the Federal Reserve that does it, by the way. It's actually a policy that would be enacted from the U.S. Treasury. So if he really wanted a weaker dollar, all he'd have to do is say, hey, Steve Mnuchin, make it an official policy of the United States that we want a weaker dollar. Will he do that? I hope he doesn't. I hope he doesn't, because that's going to make everything that we buy more expensive. I don't know why you want to race to the bottom. I don't know why he wants to claim that this is the best economy ever in the history of the United States, which would support and help create a stronger dollar. And then he says, no, I don't want it. I don't want it. And he says, obviously, we're still going to win either way. Whether or not we get help from the Federal Reserve or not, we're still going to win either way. I don't know what he means by winning. Do you? We're not winning this trade war. Nobody wins trade wars. China's not winning either. That's the problem with them. This is one of the only things that you get a group of economists in a room together. This is the one thing that 99% of them are going to agree on. No trade wars. Not good. Tariffs aren't good. You know why? Because if you increase tariffs on me, I'm going to increase tariffs on you. Oh, you're going to increase them back on me? I'm going to do it again. Oh, you're going to do that? Oh, I'm going to do it again. And that's exactly what we are seeing. History might not repeat, but it rhymes, doesn't it? This isn't good policy. You have farmers going bankrupt. You have the bulk of the bailout money to the farming industry going to major corporations. Not the family farmer, but the big farmers. Is that what you voted for? I didn't vote for this. I guarantee you these farmers didn't vote for this either. Is the president going to carry Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin again? The Rust Belt and heavy agriculture states? Very interesting question. We have a long time to go before we get there. But the strategy and these policies that this president is implementing, I think, are harmful. I think it's a disservice to this country. Candidate Trump had it right, that the Fed was creating bubbles, that funny money, quantitative easing, low interest rates was a wealth transfer from the middle class to the upper echelons of society. It got to go. Now he's president and he wants bubble after bubble after bubble. He wants the stock market to just keep going up, up, and up. Meanwhile, most Americans don't own stocks. And if they do, they have it in a 401k where they can't even use that money because if they take it out prematurely, they're fined and taxed. So it's just a paper gain. And you think most Americans are savvy enough to time the market? Most professionals, 99% of professional traders and investors aren't smart enough and savvy enough to time the market. So what's he going to do? This is why it's an abuse of power to take ownership of the stock market and just try to keep trumping it up all the time. It's unhealthy. It sets a very dangerous precedent because I guarantee you, to my conservative and Republican friends out there who are listening, if Barack Obama was obsessed with the stock market, you'd be going crazy. What's he doing? Is he a financial dictator? It's not his job to be talking about this. What about free market capitalism? But now it's your guy. So what are you doing? You support this? Are you fine with this? Because I'm not. It's a huge abuse of power. Huge. It sets a very dangerous precedent because what happens if Bernie Sanders wins? Serious question. What happens if Elizabeth Warren wins or Kamala Harris or any of them and they start talking about the stock market one way or the other? You're going to be happy with that? Probably not. But that's that, and we'll keep you posted on that because Donald Trump is not going to stop tweeting. Who knows what the policy is going to be? I mean, that's the other thing that keeps everybody on edge. There's no plan, there's no strategy, just keep everybody on edge. Tariffs one day, weak dollar another, I'm okay with the dollar being here, blah, blah, blah. You never know. But getting back to Bernie Sanders. One of the first things that he said during his interview with Joe Rogan, which I thought was very fascinating and no surprise to us here, but he made a very profound statement. It was, we have 20 people up on stage. Obviously, they split it up, so 10 and 10, let's say. But how can you have a true, authentic debate, if you even want to call it that, when you only have 1 minute, maybe two tops to answer a question? Then you're going to get, 30, 45 seconds if you're lucky in a rebuttal if somebody comes after you, or if one of the moderators just happens to pick on you to follow up. I mean, you can't get your message across. You're talking about issues that are very important to this country, very important to voters across the spectrum, and Americans have the right to know what these people who are running for the highest office in this country think and how they're going to solve these problems. How are they going to identify them? What type of people are they going to surround themselves with to tackle these issues? What are they going to do? You cannot talk about healthcare, gun regulation, the economy. You can't talk about a whole host of things in 2 minutes. So it is the platform that we have is somewhat a disservice to this country and to the political process, because it really isolates those with the money, because it gives those people who are on the periphery not much of a fighting chance. Because while they're going to get a minute here or a minute there, that's all they're going to get in a debate that's a few hours, but you got 10 people up there. And the moderators and the reporters, they're going to focus on the people at the center of the stage because they have the biggest money, they have the highest ratings in the polls, and that's where they're going to focus their attention. We need a new system. We need a new platform. And Bernie Sanders said it right. He said it's a reality TV show up there. He said it's a joke. He said you have to be, instead of talking about real issues, you have to come up with a soundbite. And that's exactly it. You have to come up with a soundbite, because if you talk about something and you get real deep to it, deep into it, it's not sexy enough. And reporters aren't going to flock to it. And the spin room and all the reporters after the debate, they're not going to talk about it because you were actually having an important discussion. You were having serious comments, serious thoughts about structural issues in this country. But it's not sexy enough. But if you attack somebody, if you say something outrageous, everybody's going to talk about you. And this is part of Donald Trump's genius, because he knows how to play the media and he knows how to play Americans. He did it. He did it. He knew what to say. He knew how to get under people's skin. He knew how to go against the grain at the right time. You got to give credit where credit is due. Now, I'm not saying this is a good skill set to have, but if you want to break above the mold, if you want to have basically free media, which Donald Trump talks about all the time, he got it. He got it because he knew how to play it. He knew how to get those sound bites. He's been doing it for years. So that's an unfortunate reality that we have here, and we have to contend with that. But I honestly think that every candidate, and they should do it multiple times, but they should go on Joe Rogan's podcast. He has a huge audience. Again, he asks good, interesting questions, and he allows the candidate or whoever his guest is to speak. Now, I would have to say Joe Rogan probably leans a little bit more towards the liberal side of things, but so what? Makes no difference. His questions are good. They're intelligent. They're trying to get deep to the structural issue. How did we get here? Why did we get here? How are we going to get out of it? What are the problems? How are we going to get there? And you just let them go, and that's exactly how it should be. And it's a long range, open range podcast, if you will. 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, however long the candidate wants to be there. I imagine Joe Rogan will accommodate, because that's pretty much how long all of his podcasts are to begin with. And I have to say this too. And again, especially to those who are not fans of Bernie Sanders, take the time to watch this. It's only an hour. They cover a whole bunch of topics. But you're going to see that Bernie Sanders is not as crazy and animated and flamboyant, if you will, in this setting as opposed to when he's on the debate stage. He knows that when he's on the debate stage, he has to make a spectacle. He has to make those sound bites so people are talking about him. He knows the game. He knows the system. He's trying to play it. Does he look crazy when he's flailing his arms about and his face is getting all red and heated? Yeah. But that doesn't mean that he can't have a real conversation with somebody. And that's exactly what he has with Joe Rogan. And of course, they talked about a lot of things. They talked about Medicare for all. They talked about taxing Wall Street, quote-unquote, speculation to pay for all of this free stuff. They talked about the drug epidemic in this country. Education, free education, of course, the canceling of student debt. And that too will be paid for by taxing Wall Street speculation. Talk about gun control, talk about income inequality. So while we agree with virtually nothing from the policy prescription side of things when it comes to Bernie Sanders, his ability to identify problems is pretty good. He has been in the government for a long time. He knows how the game's played. He knows how money corrupts. He knows the lobbyists that are there. He has the statistics on this. He talks about those in the podcast. However, what he fails to recognize, along with so many other liberals and Democrats, is, and Bernie Sanders pretty much said this in the podcast interview. He said, lobbyists are the ones that are creating the laws. No, sir, no. They can write as much legislation as they want. They're not the ones voting on it. You are. You're the legislator. You're in the Senate. You're in the Congress. You're the one who passes bills, not lobbyists. Now, I know lobbyists, they throw a lot of money around, and that's the problem. So to claim here, because Bernie wants bigger government, so to claim that the very government that is running the system and is so corrupt head to toe, somehow, if he's president, everything is just magically going to disappear, and everybody's going to become an angel and a saint, and a fantastic financier and a fantastic accountant, and everything's going to be accounted for, is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And this is such a constant argument and something that I'm just dumbfounded on, because you have a lot of people, liberals and Democrats, people who are highly educated. They give a speech, they write a book, and they identify so many problems, but their solutions are terrible. They even in their rationale for the problem that they are addressing, the issues that they are addressing, going through the genesis of how the problem started, they complain about the government in this process, and then their solution is, well, we need more government. It makes no sense whatsoever. So I don't know if something's missing, but something's missing. So again, Medicare for all, talking about health care being a right. We've had this conversation here many times. We will continue to have this conversation here many times, because this is a front and center issue during the 2020 presidential campaign. This is probably Bernie Sanders' biggest issue, probably the same thing with Elizabeth Warren, and probably a couple others as well. But this is Bernie's probably number one issue. And there are logical arguments. There are arguments that are stated that appeal, obviously, to a lot of people. There are a lot of people who think Medicare for all is a viable solution. It's not. These are the programs that are bankrupting this country: Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, because it's managed by the government. It's taxes taken out of our paychecks on a weekly basis, and it goes to a whole bunch of people in Congress who don't know what they're doing to then redistribute the money to a whole bunch of hospital and administrators who also don't know what they're doing, overpaid, and you have the issues that we have in this country. You just do. So is health care a right? You don't have the right to somebody's labor. You don't. You can go into an emergency room, you're going to be treated. If you have cash in your pocket, you can pay the doctor cash. They'll take it, believe me. The doctors will take cash. I know they will for a fact. Okay? So, healthcare for all, Medicare for all, is a non-starter for me. It's not the right solution. Does he go after and attacking pharmaceutical companies, health insurance companies, and their tactics with lobbying and corrupting the system? Absolutely. And that needs to be investigated, and that needs to be dealt with. We talk about that in our book, The Cynic's Guide to Investing. We devote a whole chapter to lobbying. That's how important it is, even when you're taking into consideration investment opportunities. Because the book is called The Cynic's Guide to Investing. So, all of these major health insurance companies, they're putting a lot of money into some political campaigns here. I bet it's not because they're just being nice. I bet they don't even care who wins. You know why? Because they're giving money to the Democrat and the Republican. So maybe, just maybe, they're going to get something in return for all that money they gave them. I mean, we say call us cynical, but that's just the way the world works. Unfortunately, it doesn't have to work that way, but in our current system it does, and that needs to go. So you know that these health insurance companies are going to benefit. So maybe you look at their stock price and you say, well, maybe it's undervalued compared to where it's going. Just something to look at. He talks about taxing Wall Street speculation. Now, he throws this word around so loosely it's ridiculous. Because basically speculation to Bernie Sanders is every transaction when you buy and sell a stock or bond. Every transaction when you buy or sell a stock or bond. It isn't speculation. That's investing. How does he know if you're going to buy a stock and hold it for the next 10 years? That's not speculation. That's an investment. Speculation is maybe trying to time the market over the course of a week or a month. Maybe a company is going through bankruptcy or is about to go bankrupt and you think they're going to be saved at the last minute and you're betting a lot of money that everything's going to turn around. That's speculation. How is Bernie Sanders going to know what you're doing? Seriously, how's he going to know? But no, just Wall Street. I don't like what anybody's doing. Everybody up there on Wall Street's got big money. Anybody who's in the stock market or in the bond market must have big money. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. Is it something that could be discussed? Sure, you can discuss it. I don't think it's that good of an idea personally, but, you know, there's other ways you can get money. They talk about the drug epidemic in the country, which I think needs to be something that is addressed front and center. Because people have to understand the interconnectedness of everything. When you have an economy that has seen anemic growth over the course of this quote-unquote business cycle, this business expansion that we have been in, the longest in U.S. history, and why are so many people still unemployed, and why are so many people turning to drugs? Well, it's probably because they're economically depressed, and then they become physically and emotionally depressed, and then they look for an outlet, and then they start taking drugs. So I got to give, again, credit where credit's due. They had a good in-depth discussion on this, and it's something to pay attention to. I mean, this is a tragedy. This is a tragedy. We had the shootings over the weekend. That's a tragedy. There's lots of tragedies. They happen every single day. But if you want to talk about death toll, I mean, it's hard to hold a candle to the drug epidemic we have in this country. Education, canceling out student loan debt. Again, this is going to be paid for by his Wall Street speculation tax. Again, he has an emotional appeal to this. He said, well, if we can bail out Wall Street, why can't we bail out a whole bunch of kids? Because they didn't do anything illegal. They didn't do anything fraudulently. They're just trying to better themselves getting an education. If we can bail out Wall Street, they committed fraud. They committed crimes. They knew they were selling crap. They did it anyways, and then they destroy the system, and then they get bailed out to the tunes of trillions of dollars. Why can't we bail out students who are just trying to better themselves? That is a very emotional, and it's an even logical argument to some extent. It truly is, and that's why it's appealing. However, it's such a huge moral hazard. What about the people, such as myself, who was prudent and said, well, you know what, I got this student, I'm going to pay it off at an accelerated rate. I'm going to forego doing some other things so I can get this debt burden off my back. Am I gonna be taken care of? Reparations for me? Because I'm going to tell you what, if they do this, I will be in Washington, D.C. demanding reparations. I will want my money back, plus interest. Because I can tell you right now, if I had invested that money, I would have made money on it. So they will be paying me back if they do this and forgive student debts. Believe you me. Gun control. We had that conversation yesterday. And I got to give Bernie some credit, at least from what he said. He said he supports the Second Amendment, but he doesn't like the assault weapons. Of course, he's talking about the military-grade weapons that can fire, semi-automatic rounds and this, that, and the other. But he said, look, I come from the state of Vermont. It's a very rural state. Hunting, be outdoorsman. It's a tradition in his home state. So it's not like he wants to take everything away. Now, that's what he says. But at least it was a decent answer. It wasn't a crazy Bernie off the cuff coming out of left field. And that's the other thing that I like about this setting. This was a true conversation. Because when you listen to Bernie Sanders on most other shows, it's for sound bites. He's trying to get as much attention as he can. He's playing the game. He has to. That's what you all have to do. That's what Donald Trump did and does. You're looking for attention. You're in a crowd of 20 people. You have to differentiate yourself. The squeaky wheel gets the oil. That's what these people unfortunately have to do. But with Joe Rogan, it was a civil discussion. It was a calm setting, as it usually is. And I really hope that you take the time to do it. It's going to be a service for you because you're a voter. You're a citizen. You have to be aware of what these candidates think. And I think you'll be better served. Again, we have Tulsi Gabbard, had an interview with Joe Rogan, and now Bernie Sanders. Check them both out. Listen to both of them. And I bet you'll think that some of these people are a little bit more reasonable than what the Republicans and Fox News and some conservative commentators might have you believe. I'm not saying you're going to turn on to be a fan of these people. I'm most definitely not. But at least maybe, just maybe, we can tone down some of the heat and the rhetoric. Maybe, just maybe, we can have a civil discussion in this country about politics and our state of affairs. That's how we're going to move forward together. Because tweets and name-calling and sound bites, all that's going to do is put people further to the left, further to the right. It's divide and conquer, and we need to get together to solve the problems that we're facing. So I advise all candidates to do the Joe Rogan podcast. Get on there, sit down with the man for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and inform the American people what you believe. Thank you so much for joining me today, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a pleasure having you. As always, please like, share, subscribe, and get the word out. We do love hearing from you. So leave those comments. This is the Kapital News. I am Alex Karitis. Godspeed.